The dog didn't move. Elijah's knees hit the gravel as he dropped beside the tiny body, blood staining the red dirt beneath. One paw was twisted unnaturally, the other still bound with rusted wire. "Come on, little guy, stay with me," he whispered, pressing his hands against the pup's chest. Cars flew by, oblivious, and in that deafening silence, something inside him broke wide open. The morning had started like any other. Elijah Carter had dust on his boots, sun in his eyes, and dreams he never spoke out loud. At just 20, he worked long days along Highway 71, laying concrete under the burning Alabama sky. His mother, Marcia, cleaned houses to keep their rented trailer running. Life wasn't cruel, but it was indifferent. He loved animals, always had, maybe because they never asked questions, never judged, maybe because, like him, they just wanted to be seen. He had once dreamed of becoming a vet, but dreams cost money and time, and the kind of luck Elijah never seemed to have. Still, that morning, something felt off. A glint of fur on the roadside. A shape, too still. He hit the brakes without thinking. This is a story about mercy, instinct, and a bond no one saw coming. But that morning, something else was waiting in the dust. Elijah woke up every day before the sun did. The floor of the trailer was always cold, and the smell of his mother's coffee always came before her footsteps. "Don't forget your water jug," Marcia reminded him that morning, wiping her hands on her apron. "I won't, Ma," he said, slinging his worn-out backpack over one shoulder. Their trailer sat at the edge of the woods where the dirt road met the highway. Nothing much ever changed there, except the prices at the gas station and the silence between people who had too little to say. At the job site, the other workers laughed, cussed, and hollered at the heat. Elijah mostly stayed quiet, focused, not out of shyness, just habit. When Frank Delaney, the site foreman, barked orders, Elijah listened fast and spoke slow. That afternoon, a stray mutt wandered close to the site. Mangy, limping. Elijah knelt down, offering a crust from his sandwich. The dog flinched and ran. Frank saw it and scoffed. "Ain't no use feeding disease on legs, Carter. They'll only come back for more." Elijah didn't answer, but later he left the crust by a rock near the fence. He never said it out loud, but animals made him feel human. The drive home took him along Highway 71, a long, hot stretch where everything shimmered in waves of heat. He had his window rolled down, radio off, when something caught his eye on the shoulder, a flash of tan fur, curled tight and unmoving. At first he thought it was trash, but something in his gut twisted. He pulled over. The filth hit him first, then the blood, then the silence. A small dog, no more than a few months old, tied with rusted wire at the legs, ribs poking through skin, muzzle caked in dry mud and ants. Elijah's hands shook as he reached out. He'd seen roadkill before, but this wasn't dead. Not yet. He felt for a heartbeat. There, barely there. And in that second, as the Alabama sun scorched his back and the wind carried dust into his throat, Elijah Carter knew. Whatever happened next, he couldn't walk away. He wanted to be enough. Elijah had never had much. Not money, not connections, not even a decent pair of boots without holes. But in that moment, kneeling in the dust, he wanted one thing more than anything: to make this little creature breathe easy again. He pulled his work knife from his belt and began cutting through the wire wrapped tight around the pup's legs. The metal had bitten deep into the skin, old wounds, not fresh. Whoever had done this hadn't cared if the dog bled or starved. Maybe that was the point. The pup whimpered, barely audible, but it was sound. "You're still in there," Elijah whispered. "Good boy." He wrapped the pup in his flannel overshirt, still warm from the sun. Blood soaked through instantly. Elijah poured the last of his water into his hands and tried to rinse the crusted dirt off the dog's snout. Cars passed. One slowed, then sped off again. No one stopped. Elijah stood, cradling the puppy against his chest like a newborn. He looked back toward the job site, a good mile behind him now, and then toward the town, another 6 ahead. His phone had no signal. Of course it didn't. Not out here. He started walking. The sun scorched the back of his neck, sweat dripping into his eyes. Buddy, he'd already named the pup in his mind, barely stirred. His head lolled against Elijah's arm, too weak to hold up. A truck honked and roared past. A few drivers looked, none slowed. After what felt like forever, he saw the old diner sign near a gravel side road. Next to it, a rusting vending machine and a payphone. Elijah ran. He dialed the only vet clinic he knew, 20 minutes away in Jasper, and begged for help. They said no. No transport, no appointments, no vet on site. He slammed the receiver. "Hang on, buddy," he murmured. "We'll figure this out." Behind the diner, in a storage shed left half open, Elijah found some shade, an old blanket and a crate of expired bottled water. He laid the puppy down gently, soaked the blanket, and draped it over him. And then he just sat, watching, waiting, praying. When the sun dipped low and the air cooled, Buddy started trembling. His breath rattled, his paws twitched. Elijah held him through the seizures, eyes wide and helpless. Please, not like this. But no one came. No sirens. No help. Just the rasp of breathing and the echo of Elijah's quiet, crumbling hope. Night fell without mercy. The storage shed behind the diner grew colder as the hours crawled by. Elijah sat on the dirt floor, his back against the wall, arms wrapped around his knees. Buddy lay curled on the blanket beside him, breathing shallow, eyes half-lidded but open. Elijah kept checking his chest for movement, every few minutes, just to be sure. "Still with me," he whispered. He'd called the vet clinic again. They hadn't picked up. At some point, he'd stopped expecting miracles. He opened one of the expired water bottles and let a few drops fall into Buddy's mouth. The pup didn't flinch, but he swallowed. It was enough to make Elijah cry. Not loud, not messy, just silent tears tracking down dusty cheeks. He'd never felt so angry, not at the vet, not at the strangers who passed him on the highway, at himself. He should have had money, should have had a car, should have been able to do more. "You deserve better," he said softly. "So much better." The next morning, Elijah wrapped Buddy in a towel and made his way back to the job site on foot. He'd missed his shift, and he knew what that meant. Frank Delaney was already waiting. "You don't show, you don't work," Frank barked. "And if you think I'm paying for yesterday, think again." Elijah didn't answer. He just kept walking toward the tool shed, Buddy cradled like glass in his arms. Frank's eyes narrowed. "That the same damn mutt you dragged off the road?" "Yeah." "Jesus, Carter, you're wasting your time, probably full of worms and rabies. You'll get sick, let it go." "I'm not leaving him." Frank stepped closer. "You're on my site, you follow my rules. That thing comes in here again, I'll put it down myself." The words hit like gravel in the gut. Elijah said nothing, but that night he didn't take Buddy back to the diner. He hid him behind the equipment trailer, where the machines cast long shadows and no one looked twice. He used scraps from lunch to feed him, refilled a plastic bottle cap with water, whispered stories about how one day they'd leave this place and do something that mattered. Buddy started responding, small things, a lifted ear, a weak tail flick, a slow blink that said, "I'm still here." But peace never lasted long. 3 days later, Elijah arrived early and found the spot empty. Buddy was gone. His heart slammed against his ribs. He searched the trailers, the trash bins, the tool shed, and then he heard it, a faint, pained yelp from behind the foreman's truck. Buddy was tied again, this time with plastic zip ties around his legs and a rag stuffed in his mouth, blood on his side. Frank leaned against the truck, arms crossed. "I warned you, Carter." Elijah didn't speak, didn't blink. He knelt, hands trembling, and began cutting Buddy free with the blade on his keys. Frank spat on the gravel. "You care more about a mutt than your own job? Go on then, take him. You're done here." Elijah stood slowly, Buddy in his arms once again. "Good," he said. He turned and walked. Away from the tools, away from the paycheck, away from the people who didn't understand, into nothing with everything he had. That night, as thunder cracked in the distance and the sky turned the color of bruised steel, Elijah knew one thing for certain. He had no plan. But he wasn't letting Buddy die in this place. And you? Have you ever seen a moment when an animal's pain felt more human than most people's silence? Tell me in the comments. Maybe your story, like Elijah's, can remind someone that compassion doesn't need permission. Sometimes the smallest life is what teaches us how to fight for something bigger. The storm didn't wait. By nightfall, Elijah was miles from the job site. The only shelter in sight, a half-collapsed barn off a forgotten dirt road. He ducked inside with Buddy wrapped tight against his chest, heart racing from cold and fear and something heavier, uncertainty. The barn groaned with every gust of wind. Rain leaked through the roof in crooked lines. Dust turned to mud. Elijah sat on a stack of old hay bales and laid Buddy down on a frayed tarp, covering him with his jacket. "Hang on, little guy," he whispered. "I know it's not much, but it's all I got." He hadn't slept in over a day. His stomach was empty. His hands were raw. Still, he stayed awake, eyes locked on Buddy's chest, waiting for each rise and fall. Then, around midnight, it happened. A twitch, subtle, barely there. Elijah leaned in. Buddy's paw had moved. He blinked. Another twitch. Then a small, strained breath. "Buddy," Elijah whispered. The dog's eyes fluttered open, cloudy, unfocused, but open. And then, impossibly, Buddy moved his head, slowly, until his nose touched Elijah's wrist. Not a lick, not a bark, just that tiny, deliberate motion. Elijah froze. It was like something sacred had passed between them, like the dog wasn't just alive, but aware, present, choosing to stay. A lump caught in Elijah's throat. He lowered his head, resting his forehead against Buddy's. "I thought I lost you," he murmured. The wind howled outside, rattling the barn walls, but inside there was only the sound of breathing, and a kind of peace Elijah hadn't known in years. He didn't need anyone to explain what had happened. He didn't need a vet or a priest. He just knew. Buddy had chosen to fight, and somehow Elijah did too. Morning broke quietly, filtered through the gaps in the barn's slanted roof. The storm had passed, leaving the world soaked and silent. Elijah sat cross-legged near Buddy, arms wrapped around himself for warmth. The pup slept deeply now, belly rising and falling with more rhythm. No more tremors, no more gasps, just sleep. Healing sleep. Elijah had never seen anything so perfect. He scavenged through the barn and found an old metal bowl. He filled it with rainwater from a clean patch of tarp outside, brought it back in, and set it beside Buddy. When Buddy stirred and slowly leaned toward the bowl, lapping at it clumsily, Elijah let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding for hours. "That's it, boy," he whispered. "You're doing it." Throughout the day, Buddy stayed quiet, but alert. Elijah used his own shirt to gently clean the wounds again. The bleeding had stopped. The swelling had gone down. The infection hadn't won. He shared a leftover granola bar, crumbled it into tiny pieces, letting Buddy nibble from his hand. It wasn't medicine, but it was something. And more than that, it was trust. In those quiet hours, Elijah spoke to Buddy the way he never spoke to anyone else. About his dad's accident, about working since he was 14, about how Marsha Carter used to bring home stray cats even when they had no food to spare. "I used to think maybe I'd make it out of all this," he said, voice soft. "Go to school, fix animals like you, but dreams get heavy when you're always holding someone else up." Buddy pressed his nose into Elijah's leg. That was all the answer he needed. By sunset, Elijah knew they couldn't stay there. The barn was too exposed, too near the highway. Someone could come by. Someone like Frank. He wrapped Buddy gently in a burlap sack, lined it with dry hay, and set off walking north, toward his late grandfather's old property. A hunting cabin, miles out, untouched in years. Maybe it was still standing. The road there was rough, the sky growing dim fast. Elijah moved slow, cradling Buddy close. Every step hurt, his legs ached, his back burned, but he kept going. Just past mile 5, headlights appeared behind him, a red pickup. Elijah ducked off the road, heart pounding. He recognized it immediately. Frank's truck. The engine roared past, then slowed, stopped. Elijah froze, pressing into the brush. The truck backed up. He clutched Buddy tighter. Then, a voice. "Carter, you out here, boy?" Frank's voice, closer now. Elijah's mind raced. He couldn't outrun a truck, couldn't fight a grown man with a weapon. He could barely stand. Buddy shifted in his arms, breathing hard. He whispered, "Shh, shh, I got you." And then it hit him. They weren't safe. Not yet. Not even close. Elijah didn't run. There was no point. His body was past empty, scraped raw by days without sleep, food, or rest. His legs ached with every breath. But what hurt more was the fear in Buddy's small, tired eyes. So instead of hiding, Elijah stepped out of the brush. The red truck's headlights hit him square in the chest. Frank stood by the driver's door, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You're really out here carrying that mutt like he's your damn baby." Elijah didn't answer. Frank stepped forward. "You think this makes you a hero? You think that thing's gonna thank you? Look at it. It ain't even worth the fleas." "He's not a thing," Elijah said, voice low. "And I'm not doing it for thanks." Frank spat into the dirt. "You're pathetic." Then he turned back toward his truck. For a second, Elijah thought he was leaving. But Frank reached behind the seat and pulled out a rusted shovel. "I warned you, Carter. Let it go." Elijah backed up slowly. Buddy whimpered in his arms, sensing the shift. Frank raised the shovel, and that's when Elijah did something reckless, stupid, brave. He stepped between Buddy and the threat. "No," Frank blinked. "What?" "You'll have to go through me." There was a long silence. Then Frank laughed. "You'd take a beating for a dog?" Elijah didn't move, didn't flinch. "Yeah, I would." The shovel lowered an inch. Frank stared at him for a long, quiet moment. Then, without a word, he tossed the shovel into the truck bed, climbed into the cab, and slammed the door. The engine roared to life. Tires spat gravel. Elijah stood still until the red taillights vanished into the dark. His knees buckled. He collapsed onto the ground, clutching Buddy to his chest, gasping like someone who'd been holding his breath for years. The tears came next. Hot, quiet, and full of every weight he'd carried alone. Buddy licked his chin. Weak, but present. Under the starlit sky, soaked in sweat and dust, something broke open between them, something that didn't need words. That night they reached the cabin. The place was barely standing, windows broken, roof leaking, but it had 4 walls, and that was enough. Elijah built a fire. Buddy curled beside him, wrapped in blankets made from whatever he could find. They slept, safe, together, and for the first time in a long time. Elijah didn't dream of running away. He dreamed of staying. Spring came slowly to the hills. By the time the dogwoods bloomed outside the cabin, Buddy was walking on his own, still with a limp, but stronger every day. He followed Elijah around the clearing, barking at squirrels, chasing moths, chewing through old boots. Elijah had patched up the cabin, gotten help from a retired neighbor who remembered his grandfather. People brought supplies now and then, food, blankets, even books on animal care. Word had spread about the boy who gave up everything for a dog, and somehow people cared. One afternoon, a man from a community college dropped by with a brochure and an offer, a part-time veterinary assistant program. No tuition, just work and heart. Elijah held the paper in his hands for a long time. "You think I can do this?" he asked, glancing at Buddy. The dog wagged his tail and sneezed. Elijah laughed. "Yeah, me too." He didn't say goodbye to the cabin when he left. He just packed his things, lifted Buddy into the truck bed lined with blankets, and looked out at the trees one last time. It hadn't been much, but it had been enough to begin again. Maybe you know someone like Elijah. Someone who's been overlooked, who's carried more than they should, with less than they need. Or maybe you've been that person. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of a time when kindness changed everything, let it live a little longer. Leave a comment. Share your own story, You never know who might need to hear it today, and if you're still watching from somewhere out there, tell me, where in the world are you right now? I want to see how far Buddy's strength can travel, because sometimes the ones who save us don't wear capes. They wear fur, and they find us when we've nearly given up.